So, welcome everybody to another edition of DCD Discover Dialogues. I'm Amy Bowring. I'm the Executive and Curatorial Director of Dance Collection DOS, and I'm very excited to have our guest Collette Murray with us today. I just want to take a moment first to acknowledge where we are. Dance Collection DOS works on the land that has been the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. It has been a site of human activity, including dance, for tens of thousands of years, and we are grateful to all the caretakers, both recorded and unrecorded, of this land and of Turtle Island. Today, the meeting place of Tkaronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and dance in the community on this territory. For my own part, I am the descendant of livyers, or people who live year-round on the island of what is now called Newfoundland. And I acknowledge the fact that the colonial presence on this island ultimately led to the extinction of the Beothuk people. So now we'll turn to Collette. Collette Murray is a multi-award-winning artist scholar, a dance educator, cultural arts programmer, mentor, and arts consultant. She is currently pursuing a Ph.D. in dance studies at York University, focusing on dance education and anti-racist dance pedagogies. She is the owner of Miss Coco Murray, her mobile dance education business, and she's the artistic director of Coco Collective, offering culturally responsive projects that connect participants to African and Caribbean arts. Collette's publications focus on cultural education and are included in dance media, professional resources for the arts sector, and peer-reviewed academic journals. She explores dance contexts of Caribbean folklore and West Africa in her art research. Coco Collective is an intergenerational team of artists known for performances at arts organizations, universities, museums, Afrofest, Theatre Direct, Canada's National Ballet School, and the Canadian Opera Company. So welcome, Collette. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I want to draw people's attention to a particular piece of your work that came out a little while ago in 2021 in the Canadian Journal of History. Audience, if you can lay your hands on it, it's volume 56, number 3. It was a specific theme issue of the Canadian Journal of History, and Collette wrote an article for it titled Educating from Difference, Perspectives on Black Cultural Art Educators' Experiences with Culturally Responsive Teaching. And it's a wonderful summary of her master's research, which then gradually feeds into her PhD research. So Collette, I want to, I thought maybe we could start by defining a couple of things that come up in this article that may not be familiar to people. So can you tell us a little bit about Ontario's equity and inclusive education strategy, which I think you said came out in 2009?
So the Ministry of Education developed the resource, and this is for all of the school boards to adopt equity across the curriculum and within their institute and their practices. So this plan specifically, I was looking at what was the theoretical framework grounding the equity plan, and it happened to come from an African American scholar by the name of Gloria Ladson Billings, who influenced culturally relevant pedagogy. So she theorized because it's sort of a race-based epistemology that's basically looking at one's social cultural history rather than being subject to the framework from the dominant group's social history, because she was looking at the African American students in her educational framework in her classrooms and looking at how are they not learning in the environment. So it's a pedagogy that is to intellectually and socially, emotionally, and politically use cultural references to share the knowledge and the skills and build their attitudes towards a collective empowerment. How do the students belong? How do they feel like they're seen in their educational framework, in the classroom? So the board decided to use culturally relevant pedagogy, and they're trying to disseminate that throughout all of their school boards. So at the time when I saw this, I was doing my master's of education. So before I saw the plan, I was already immersed in my studies, and I was looking at that, and I was thinking about the dance sector. I was thinking about arts. I was thinking about me as a practitioner going into the school boards and performing, but then also being an arts educator going in to offer dance. And I was thinking about how could this apply with dance? So that conversation didn't happen at the time. It has happened since then, with dance scholars that are merging the two together. So that helped to inform my master's research, where I was looking at a number of practitioners like myself who, for decades, have been entering to the school system and we've been performing or teaching. And what was our experience? Because we were bringing knowledge coming from whether it's the Caribbean communities or African diasporic communities, we're bringing this into the classroom. What was our experience? Because we were bringing cultural frames of reference into the school before these terms were even coming up. So it's not a new phenomenon. It's a matter of, well, what has been our experiences? And no one's never asked us. So that became the subject of my master's research, where I interviewed a number of people, and of course keeping everyone anonymous, because I was trying to also protect their relationships with whoever they were working with. So just to have a candid conversation. What is your experience when you offer your teaching in the school system? Whether it's dance, whether it's music, because our arts are integrated, whether it's visual arts, whether it's whatever the art form was. So that led to a lot of findings and a lot of analysis that I had to do. So that came out of that paper. And then I actually got it published because it just seemed to be a fitting article to submit for this particular issue, which had to do with it was the Canadian Journal of History. It was a specific issue about Black creative expressions. So that's where I had entered that, as opposed to a dance publication. I decided to enter it there. So,
Right, right, right. And so can you explain a little bit more about what culturally responsive pedagogy means?
okay. So culturally responsive pedagogy comes from another author. So Gloria Ladson-Billen's work influenced Geneva Gay, who was positioning culturally responsive teaching. So this is the actions. How can we be responsive to the situation? So it is a strategy that's going to acknowledge the importance of using the students' cultural frames of reference within all aspects of their learning. So this is student-centered instructions. The teachings provided within a context of culture. So for example, the cultural knowledge, the background of the student, their lived experience, whatever cultural frames of reference, their performance styles are considered, because they're ethnically and they're culturally diverse students that are in the classroom. So how do you make the learning, the curriculum relevant for them and effective for them? Because we've had a very standard curriculum throughout the decades, usually from a Eurocentric dominant framework, but you have diverse classrooms. So everyone learns differently. And if students don't see themselves in the classroom, then they may shut down, they may not connect. So if you bring other references to the same lessons and to the learning, then it helps to build all the students' cultural competency skills,
Yeah.
as well as allow them to develop their critical consciousness
Mm.
about the issues, the frames of reference they're looking at, And this is to build and foster their academic excellence. We want the students to excel.
Mm.
So these are these educational frameworks that I was starting to think about in terms of, okay, how can I bring this into the dance community? So being a dance instructor, being a dance educator, not a lot of us are looking at educational frameworks, right? So those types of ideals were kind of mulling together, and then I decided to join the PhD program, and it's influencing now. I'm looking at, okay, let's look at the dance education, how we teach, what's our pedagogy around the teaching, and then of course enters into anti-racism, anti-racist pedagogy, because we have to look at ways our methods and our practices of teaching that makes everyone feel included, and we're not discriminating and we're not isolating, and we have to really do a lot of self-reflection about how we teach and who we're including, who we're excluding. So so it's feeding into this journey that I'm on in my doctoral research.
Right. Yeah, and also, I guess, if we are of one particular culture and we see cultures that are not our own in the curriculum, then, as growing young people and as children, we see that there's validity to those other cultures, that it is not just focused on one story.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So that is beginning to happen now, because since, of course, and what has amplified this more as what happened in the pandemic, and of course, everyone's attention to the Black Lives Matter movement, and everyone really being vocal about their experiences as Black people, um, these conversations entered into the dance community. So we do need to look at not only how we treat the Black community, but all diverse communities when we're teaching dance or we're developing dance programming, because it's just been a particular hierarchy
Mm,
of particular dance vernaculars. These are what's valid. This is what makes you the professional dancer. And every other dance genre around that or dance practice is othered. It doesn't belong. So everyone's been navigating this for decades, but now it's time to bring inclusive and diverse programming,
yeah, yeah,
dance programming, and how are we going to teach the teachers? So this is sort of what I'm
right.
looking at.
Yes,
How are
right. There's
we
more than one
there's
group that needs to be educated, isn't there?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
And it really, I guess for me, I'm looking at my own professional development and how do I think about my own biases? What is my personal pedagogy? What is the dance pedagogy that I'm also using? And then I have to think about the environments that I'm creating and how inclusive is that. I may offer whatever art form I'm giving, but who is arriving into the space,
mhm,
and how am I going to work with them and transmit knowledge to them? So I have to also do a lot of critical self-reflection. So this is part of so part of the anti-racist dance pedagogy is the dance educator also has to do a critical self-reflection
mhm,
about ourselves and how we think,
right.
and are how we are developing our curriculum and how we are teaching. So methods and practices, but also thinking about our beliefs and our past, how we were trained in dance. It does influence our pedagogy.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah,
And if people are not going through a regular and evolving self-critical reflection about their practice and paying attention to the conversations and the landscape, you could be using a very old model that does exclude people.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and talking about that exclusion, I just wanna come back to something that you mentioned earlier about how no one had asked us, right? Us,
Hmm.
you and other Afro-diasporic educators, artist educators. You
Hmm.
you talk about the lack of data, so maybe you could talk about that a bit more and just, other motivations for this research.
Um, the motivation mainly is to talk about the work that I do and I see what my other colleagues have been doing. there's been generations of us that have been doing this type of work in different capacities. So the lack of data means that, number one, there is no conversation with dancers or teaching artists, whatever the label you want to put on us. I'm going to say dance educators, but if we say teaching artists, then it will open it up to the visual artist, to the musician, to the drummer, to the
Mm.
whatever instrument that they play. So the data around this, because again, we've had relationships with school boards, specific schools, specific organizations. Some of us have been funded by the arts councils. Some of us talk about this in our grants.
Mhm.
Where's the
Uh-huh.
data? Because it's not just in the last few years we've been thinking about working with schools and communities. We've been doing this for decades.
Mm.
So where is that data to show that there has been a presence of African diasporic educators, arts educators going into the schools, but no one thought to even think about collecting that data. So there's no data available. So I'm really relying on people's personal lived experience.
Mhm.
And if I didn't ask, I'm hearing things that happened decades ago, but it's still carried forward in their engagements. So the data is lacking because no one ever thought to capture it.
Yeah, right. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And you talk about in this particular article, you talk about your methodology and using critical race theory as a framework for this study.
Mhm.
Do you want to expand a bit on that and how you use that?
Yes. Critical race theory, a very political conversation going in the United States about whether to use this or not. Let me share my screen.
Okay.
I will share my screen so everyone can get an understanding of this particular theory. Can everyone see my screen?
It's
Is it
just starting to come up.
okay?
There it is. Yeah.
Okay. So if it's too small, I could probably expand. 1 second. I'll make it a little bit bigger. Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, when we're talking about racism and we're talking about race, it really has to do with relationships of power. So basically, I use this theory to really analyze and center race and racism when discussing the educational inequity of the student experience, but also the artist, us as artists entering into the school, our actual experience too, as teachers. So it's basically a theory that will center live experiences, and it's like a counter narrative to challenge the dominant narrative. So, for example, we're offering knowledge production from different global communities as African diasporic educators and artists. We're using knowledge that comes from our cultures and from our communities, which does differ from the dominant Eurocentric dominant narrative. So we're bringing this into the classroom. So I was using this because it allowed the voice of the artist to be centered.
Hmm.
It allowed their knowledge production to be centered. And because of the positionality that we hold, we also have different intersections in our identities, and there are multiple oppressions that come from this. When we are intersecting race, gender, class, ethnicity, sexuality, because this shapes who we are as individuals and as groups. So I decided to use this theory, not because I know it's very political in the United States. I think Texas, they don't even want anyone to use this theory. Well, it's because people are uncomfortable having to be reminded about the racism that stems from white supremacy.
Hmm.
That's pretty much it in a nutshell. And we have to understand what whiteness is, to understand how it operates and moves and impacts communities that are not white. This is just the reality. So I use this theory in the research because it's important to center. That's where the conversation is coming from. The educational system was built from a colonial period. It comes from a Eurocentric lens, and it was a standard educational curriculum for all participants to learn from because it's part of an assimilation process.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. So if you're coming with counter narratives, because we all come from different cultures, this is going to counter that dominant narrative. So this particular theory allows me to center those knowledges and to center the lived experiences of those who are moving counter to the dominant narrative. Yeah.
Yes, right, right. Yeah. And of course, you found all kinds of stories of successes and challenges from the artist educators that you interviewed. I have to like there were more than a few where my eyebrows went up or my jaw dropped for either good reasons or bad reasons.
Yes.
But it is really interesting, and it's very important to hear those perspectives, and I wondered if you could, share a few of those successes and challenges that
I'm
you.
wondering which one made your mouth drop
Oh,
first.
okay, so now I'm gonna have to go back through my notes here to find it. Um,
I thought all of them were like, hmm. Some
uh,
of them were like, yeah, I understand. But others I was also shocked as well.
yeah, right. Well, yeah, what was it? Right. Those, let's see, there's one about people in teacher training being reprimanded um, for, using or not wanting to use culturally responsive teaching. Let's see, I guess they're a bit later in here. Well, of course, the tokenism issue. That didn't surprise me. And let's see. They're towards the end here.
I can recall one for the audience. Um, there was I think it was a musician, and this was, of course, one of the elders that I had interviewed, and they were explaining that when they're aware that the arts councils have, of course, like the artisan community grant, and there's specific programming that they would partner with the school board, and they would have a structured program where they would select artists to be part of that experience. So the way the school responds to that type of program,
Mhm.
they will be prepared. The institutional preparedness is moves in a different way.
Yes.
So if the artist now comes as the artist entrepreneur and they come to offer their learning structured, their curriculum, the preparedness, it's like, oh no, we don't need to deal with this, you know, that kind of dismissive response.
Mhm.
But
Yes.
also the primary teacher in the classroom will get up and leave and think it's a break for them.
Yeah,
And then the artist is left with the children to do the activity because they don't care about it enough to think that it could be part of the learning and the assessment of the
exactly.
classroom.
Yeah, exactly. It's that, like, why bring a guest in if you're not going to incorporate that experience for the students into further teaching? Yeah,
Mhm.
I that one did. Okay,
Yeah.
here's where I wrote OMG beside it in my notes. So I'll read it. This is from, okay. So for parts of Ontario that are just becoming diversified, Amani, one of the subjects, spoke of unpreparedness by educators. So she says, as my Caribbean class was going on, you could tell that the classroom teacher guessed her way through her prep talk. I was in the middle of my movement class, and the teacher asks me in front of her students, so how do you deal with negative comments about the bodily movements? So now I am taken aback by this approach, and the kids hear negative judgment associated in moving this way. Um, is that what came to the classroom teacher's mind? It said more about her, how she was feeling as a teacher in that moment, And it reminds me of how uncomfortable a lot of teachers can be when they bring you in to teach movements and how they can feel threatened.
Yes, that's also bias showing up.
Yeah.
Um, and they think they're asking a really, they just think they're just asking a question, but they don't understand the implicit bias that they have put upon you and
Yes.
your movement practice.
Yes.
Because if you're doing Caribbean folk movement and let's say, for example, you're rolling the hips and you're rolling the waist line, but this person only considers dance through ballet and the lines and the upright core, this is still information and this is still vernacular as part of moving the body.
Yes.
So it's of course that stereotypical judgment that came in. And because their teachers asking that question, the students aren't,
Yeah.
but it's going to influence how they think about the movement.
Exactly. Exactly. They
Mhm,
totally interpret the tone of voice and the words coming out of their teacher's mouth, who it to them is like the high being of their day-to-day existence,
mhm.
that, "Oh, there's something wrong with this. There's
Yeah,
something wrong with what I'm learning and how I'm moving." Instead
and
of
yeah,
understanding how movement is an inherently human activity, and we've been doing it since we first started to create rhythms and, it
exactly.
yeah,
And,
it
and unbeknownst to that teacher, they don't understand that it's a microaggression as well.
yes, exactly. Yeah,
So that is what they are have to censor, that that's happening, but they can't react in that moment because they're trying to focus on the lesson that they're providing. So they
yes,
don't
right.
understand the stress that they're putting that educator under, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So this again gets into the anti-racist pedagogy. Like as educators, we have to prepare ourselves because we are entering into a classroom with students that we don't have a relationship with, like
mhm,
the classroom teacher. We're meeting them for the first time, so that is their only impression of us. So we have to then also censor out sometimes a microaggression and still focus on teaching the class
mhm, mhm.
and transmitting the information that we had planned to prepare and give them the experience that we had planned for.
Yes, yeah, yeah, and teaching is performative too, right? So when somebody makes a comment like that, it throws you off your game, like,
Mhm.
because you're suddenly your thoughts have been focused on the action of teaching, the performance of teaching, and then suddenly this comment throws your brain out of whack. It affects your it has to affect your confidence and self-esteem in that moment as you suddenly have to defend what you're doing.
Mm,
Um, yeah, it's got all kinds of repercussions. Yeah.
yes, exactly.
The other one that came up was sort of that view of artist visits as entertainment. Right? So this is Kofi who says that organizationally, if there is someone at an institution booking agency that approaches a school prior to the visiting artist, a set of questions and requirements are given to the teachers to prepare themselves for artists and students, and there are follow-up assessments. I try to adopt the same approach with a teacher when I teach solo, but I'm met with, quote, "Oh, we are done with this. It is just too busy. We have to move on," end quote. So the teachers do not put time in using the new activity I gave as a part of their students' growth. Many times the teachers see the work as entertainment or just a different activity to do, and it is up to me to decide that I want them to learn something that ties to their academic learning as well.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
So it
Yeah,
puts a whole extra load on the artist educator.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So, yeah, a lot of challenges. I hope people can read the article because there's a lot of depth in
Mm.
this
Yes,
article.
there is. Yeah. 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 And so, yeah, that lack of support for visits, devaluation by educators transfers to students. But then there's also lots of great stories about, you know, students being able to make a cultural connection with that visiting artist educator. And
Yes.
then, as you say, they see themselves and it validates their whole cultural experience and their identity. But then also it's a benefit to those students who are of other cultures that of not like, for example, non-Afro diasporic students who
Mhm.
then see, oh, okay, this is a valid part of the things that I can be learning. And here's my friend's culture, and now I have some access to it.
Exactly. There's access, and there's also they also may have narrow or no frame of reference of different communities from the Caribbean or from Africa. So it also kind of debunks some of those stereotypes that they may have about
Yeah.
those regions. It's
Yes.
not just a tourist space. There's a lot of vibrant things that are happening.
Exactly.
There's a lot of generational learning and living and being and
Yes.
doing.
Yeah, there's tradition and history and
Mhm.
foodways and stories and yeah, exactly.
And a lot of dance vernacular.
And a lot, yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Um, so what else was there? Oh, yeah, so one of the things I highlighted was sort of that activism role that artist educators then have to fill as well, which is an extra burden for them as well, right?
Mhm. So now, so that's why one of the recommendations I was saying to come out of that is you have to build a better relationship with the artist educators. You have to see that what we're bringing in, it's not performative. We actually bring learning,
Mm,
education into the environment and see that as equal as the other dance or art forms that you normally would have, because it's added value as opposed to, oh, it's something to dismiss, and it's just a performative, oh, it's just entertainment, we have a break now.
mhm, mhm. Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
so
exactly.
and then to think about us throughout the year that we can
Well,
offer that,
that
and
that's what I was
just
gonna yeah, I
not
was
just
let's
February.
talk about February.
Okay,
Yeah.
I know people on the call is going to smile when I talk about this subject. Okay.
And we are purposely not having this conversation in February. We made a clear choice that we would not, do this in February because for one, you are taxed beyond being taxed. So talk a bit about February.
February again. Sometimes it's the busiest month of the year for most of us, and I have, and I will call my privilege. In the last few years, I've taken a step back because it has been taxing for many years, and number two, it has to also do with the approach of institutions of contacting me at the very last minute to think about me and think about my work to come to their schools for Black History Month. So we're not an afterthought. If
Mhm,
you're really thinking about your planning for your whole school year, and I know I work in higher ed, it is stressful all year round, but we can do a little bit more effort in planning in advance for these specific months and for these specific activities. Like, so for last minute bookings, I decline
uh-huh.
because it's disrespectful.
Yeah.
Because I am the busy person. I'm not sitting around waiting for the booking to come by the phone call or by the email. I have to plan. I have to prep. I have to organize. I also have musicians. I need to book their time. We all are busy people. So, are we going to be last minute when we're celebrating Chinese New Year? No. Are we going to be last minute when we're acknowledging, of course, Ramadan? For for the Muslim communities? No, we know what's happening each calendar year.
Mhm,
So why are you contacting me in January for
mhm.
February? And why are you contacting me in February for February?
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, the shortest month of the year.
Shortest month of the year. So yes, so it's getting people to think that again, our knowledge is not only available for that month. It could be beneficial at any point of the school year if there's some careful planning and consideration that we know what you're doing in your classroom and we can have a conversation and we can bring an activity at different points of the year.
Yeah,
Mhm,
exactly, exactly. Yeah. Okay, I'm just looking at my other notes here to see if there was okay, so another issue that came up was the issue of appropriation.
mhm,
Um, so, uh, So I'm just going to quote you. This is your writing. On the other side of the spectrum, non-Black artists use their privilege to market school bookings for Black History Month and programming for Black students. This is a historical and ongoing ethical problem that perpetuates erasure of knowledgeable voices from the Black community. The powerful and entitled decision to tell and represent another culture's story is a colonial act of appropriation, and school boards should recognize their own complicit behavior in the process. If cultural arts educators cannot rely on educational spaces to unpack misrepresentations, the artist is left to do so.
Yes, and yes. So there's educational vendors that get approved by the school boards. They invite different guests, companies to come in. So when you see a company that's trying to now, for profit reasons, okay, let's do something for Black History Month, but you're not even programming people from the actual community, and you're trying to represent it yourself. I have seen the expressions of students' faces, especially Black students, when this happens, because there's this disbelief and this look of, excuse me, what's happening right now? Why are you representing the Black community in this moment? Why can't? But they're not articulating it. Their body language shows this. So again, if the programming within the school board, if they are going to program vendors that are representing other communities, that is part of the complicity, because you are erasing those of us who are trying to get hired, those of us who are available to work,
Mhm.
those of us who are actual practitioners and who have the lived experience, the studying, the training,
Yeah.
the whole experience. Like, I cannot be booked to tell an Indigenous nation's story.
Mhm.
I can't
Mhm.
do that.
Yeah.
I can't go into a school and represent a program teaching powwow
Mhm.
as a Black woman.
Yeah.
So why are you booking a company that does not have the educators from the community, but you're going to represent Africa? Africa is diverse, yes. There's many different cultures there. But what's being promoted in that month is African Heritage Month, the history of the Black people, the Indigenous African or the Caribbean or the diasporic individual. That's the identities that we're celebrating in
Mhm.
that time.
Yeah.
So it does happen, and there's a lot of unlearning that people have to do. So that's part of the process. So with an equity plan like that, people have to kind of buy into the ideas that they have to unpack their thinking, their ideologies, and their beliefs,
Yeah.
and understand that sometimes I may be part of the problem. So I have to. So I'm hoping that this article can get in the right hands so people can just look and
Yeah.
reflect on
Yeah.
their practices internally, so that these types of programming does not happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can speak to this, but I'm curious to know um if shifts are happening in training in terms of of education programs. Like, are you ever invited in to talk to teachers in training about some of these issues?
I I haven't yet, but I've published in a book that goes to beginning teachers. The conversation's starting to happen. Um, they're starting to bring like a guest artist to come and do like a workshop that kind of talks about culture relevant pedagogy to education programs. But it can't just be one person. There needs to be more than one of us that does that, because
Yeah.
otherwise it's only coming from that one person's lens. It's not only one Black person that can speak for all of us too.
Yeah.
So they need to bring multiple people to do that, because we all have multiple practices.
Yes.
And I think the beginning teachers and those in those bachelor ed programs need to see that diversity in order to understand what we're saying.
Hmm.
Um, so there is some training around this, that's starting to happen. Again, I was one of the authors as part of the my best idea, It's like an educational resource from Rubicon Publishing, and the volume was specifically in culturally relevant pedagogy. And it was how educators were sharing how they transformed their classroom using this
Ah,
pedagogy. So this is a book that was edited by educators from the school boards, and it invited a number of educators across North America to talk about how they've been using culturally relevant pedagogy to transform their classroom. I was the only artist that was
okay.
asked to be part of the project.
Right.
So I talked about what I did with a Cocoa Collective project that was working with one of the middle schools. And of course, this was a model school that was looking at how do we enhance this, because it's predominantly a racialized school, predominantly a school of Black students. How do you transform their educational experience
Mhm.
from this dominant learning narrative?
Yeah.
So bringing us in to do workshops and training and education, and to see how the group of children we worked with, how they progressed over a 6 month period or 8 month period with different programs, of course funded by the arts councils,
Mhm.
and how that transformation took place. But this was specific because it was a collaboration planning. So I'm being so it was an educator that has that grounding in culturally relevant pedagogy, the vice principal. I'm coming in as the arts educator with understanding of the educational pedagogy as well. And how do we work together to create like a partnership on how we're going to do the programming and
Yeah.
how the arts is going to enhance the students' learning experience. So
Right.
that was what I wrote about.
Mhm.
Um, so yes,
And
people can order that book too.
what's the title of that book? I'm gonna put it in the chat so people
My
can
Best Idea,
my best idea,
Volume 2.
volume 2.
So it's culturally relevant pedagogy.
Okay. And who is the
It's a
publisher?
Canadian publisher, so
Was
Rubicon,
Rubicon?
Rubicon
Yeah.
Publishing.
Okay.
So anyone can purchase that book.
There. Okay.
So it's talking about culturally relevant leadership. It's
Yeah.
talking about using culturally relevant pedagogy in mathematics. And I'm talking about arts. So different perspectives we're talking about how do we use that theory,
Yeah.
that
Right.
pedagogy. Mhm.
So we have about 15 minutes left. I want to get into your PhD work, but I also want to leave time for you to talk about what's happening at the Gardner tonight.
Oh, yes.
So, first, tell me about how your PhD is going and where you're at with that and what's happening there. What are you discovering?
So so far so good. I am balancing this as a practitioner, so as you know, it's extremely busy, and there's moments of oh my goodness, can I even do this? It's going well. I'm at the point of comprehensive research where I'm looking broadly into three different areas of research, where I'm going to be looking at how do you build dance communities. I'm going to be looking at integration of arts into the education system, and then looking at, of course, African dance education. Like, what is that looking like?
Uh-huh.
Because there are scholars that are very intentional about how to bring this into elementary school. How does this look in and bring it to university and into the training programs, the dance programs? So there's conversations around this is what we're doing and this is what can be done, and there's more of it happening.
Hmm.
Of course, this is international research because there isn't a lot of Canadian research on this.
Hmm.
So my journey has taken me internationally. So when I go to conferences, I'm traveling the world to not only disseminate my research or my artistic research, it's also to connect with the scholars and to find out what is being discussed, what is being talked about, who's talking about it, and look at resources and look at maybe some examples of what people are doing, because Canada lacks having that information about the African diasporic dance education training and experience. Um, because for generations we have had to build institutions and spaces outside of the educational dance programs or dance studios in order to do our training, in order to continue our practice. Myself, I've had to study abroad and
Mhm.
to work with master teachers and be in the environments and learn about the Caribbean and different African diasporic dance practices. So to get access to the teachers and the information, and also to see and be in the environments. So, and then to come back to Canada, it's like, how do I use this in my programming or in my work or in my research? So that's kind of where I'm at. So
Mhm.
I'm looking broadly at a lot of things, from scholars, a lot of Black scholarship that are talking about, this is what I've tried in my classroom for anti-racist dance education. This is what I'm trying to do, and this is what I'm doing, and this is what I'm analyzing, this is what I'm seeing. Um, Scholars that are talking about implicit bias in dance education and how do people belong.
Yeah.
Um, I'm meeting the scholars that of the books that I'm reading. Like, this is like fangirl moment. I'm meeting the people
Yeah.
who is writing about the work that I admire,
Yeah.
right? And how do you have culturally relevant dance education? So the conversations are happening now, but when I was doing my master's, it wasn't ready yet. So it's an exciting journey to see that there's more scholarship around it,
Mhm.
because I
Mhm.
was struggling when I was doing the master's to kind of get my ideas together and get the get the scholarship to back me up. I know
Right,
I'm
right.
living, but how can I talk about it and write about it? So that's been my doctoral journey so far.
Yeah.
Um, and also doing arts research. I mean, I did collaborate with I was a commissioned artist for the Black and Free project with Dr. Nyla Kalita May, who is from the University of Waterloo, and her project on use your art form to talk about Blackness and freedom. So identity and what what does freedom mean to me? So I was, again, the only dance artist in that year commissioned, and I was really talking about African and Caribbean ways of using dance in this conversation of emancipation.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right. So these are some of the talks that I've had. Ronald Taylor is also on the call. We've had this conversation about dance and emancipation in relationship to Toronto Caribbean Carnival
Mhm. Right.
on Turnout Radio. So we're talking about this because people forget about how dance is centered in those experiences.
Mhm.
They don't understand why we're doing the dance
Yeah.
and why we are moving the way we move. It's tied to so many things, but it's also tied to our political freedom,
Mhm.
our emancipation, and as well. So I find that I'm having a lot of conversations either internationally or in the Canadian space that hasn't been documented,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
again, archives is part of the process. I've even been on panels about archives
Yeah.
and going through the archives, and you're seeing things, and it's you see the racism, you're hearing the stories about the racism. It's triggering as a scholar.
Yeah.
So what I also learned from those conversations, especially from Dr. Cheryl Thompson, is that you have to have a praxis of care. We have to have care, self-care, as scholars, when we're looking into such really dense and really challenging topics.
Yeah.
As we're doing the research, we got to find a way to come back and revisit it, because it's hard things to read and to unpack and to analyze. And then it also can trigger back to our own individual lived experiences as well.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I'm just going through a really immersive journey
Mhm.
of, and with the goal of looking at how are we going to train the next generation of African diasporic dance educators in Canada?
Right. Yeah.
That's, that's the number one question been looming in not only my mind, but of many others. Because if the educational programs, the dance programs, we don't see ourselves there, how are we training ourselves so we can be impactful and continue to do the work
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
in the Canadian space.
In the Canadian space. And Collette, you really are leading the way in this research. And reading through this article, I think this is some of the most important research I've read in a long time. Like yeah, you can't like it's just you can't put a value on how important it is, the work that you're doing. So thank you very much
I
for
appreciate
for leading the way on that. And I'm going to put a link in so
it.
that
So for
everyone,
tonight,
yeah, for
so for
tonight.
tonight, for those of you who may not be attending, again, this is a collaboration. I'm co-curating this event with Gardner Museum. This is to have an intergenerational conversation around the Magdalene Odundu's exhibition, A Dialogue with Objects. So this is her largest North American exhibition. I am doing the panel as a dialogue with diverse artists to talk about how they interact and how they are influenced by the work.
Mhm.
Um, I'm doing a performance with the Coco Collective. This is a response to the exhibition. And then we just hope that you're able to attend.
I've got my ticket
Oh, good.
already. Yeah, yeah. So I think doors open at 5:30.
And the
Um,
panel starts at 6
Panel starts at 6. Okay. And
and
then
followed by the performance. So it goes
uh,
roll. It goes,
okay.
it has an itinerary.
Right, it has a full itinerary, yeah. So everyone, the link is there in the chat. If you click that, you'll be able to access where you can purchase tickets for the event at the Gardner Museum tonight. And yeah, it should, and the artists are coming from different genre, like different artistic genres,
Different
correct?
genres.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily you're bringing visual artists to talk about the pottery, for example.
Mhm,
Like
mhm, mhm,
I intentionally wanted a diverse perspective
mhm.
coming from the African diaspora about this exhibition.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'm also, before we sign off, I'm just going to put, so this theme, so first of all, the theme issue was curated by Dr. Cheryl Thompson, correct? And
Yes.
focused on performance. And this is what is really a coup here, is that it's in the Canadian Journal of History, which doesn't touch on performance very much
Exactly.
over its long existence, and particularly not Afro-diasporic performance. So
Yeah.
I'm just going to put the bibliographic info into that so people can get their hands on it. So it's the Canadian Journal of History, as I try to type quickly, it's volume 56, number 3, um, number 3, and it's the winter of 2021. A
I
year and
will
a
also
third.
note to the audience that this issue, there's 3 articles.
Yeah,
Myself, Dr. Emily Jabouin,
that's right.
and I think
And Dr. Seika Boy.
Dr. Seka Boy, and there's another a hip hop a scholar that's in our Canadian community
Oh,
that it's the most cited articles of the history of the journal publication.
fantastic. And I should also add that the cover art for that particular
Yes.
issue comes from the Dance Collection DOS archives from the Ola Skanks collection.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So, oh, and oh, actually, Roxy has put here, I'm going to put a direct link to it. Thanks, Roxy. Um, This will take people right to it because I think it just came to me. So I'll put this in. There we go. So click on those links before we turn off so that you can get to them easily and that they'll still be there after the chat. And Coco, I have to thank you. So wonderful to have you with us today to talk about the incredible research that you've been doing. We really, really appreciate it and wish you all the best as you carry on with it. Thank you so much. think Coco has frozen. Okay, it looks like we may have lost Collette there. But thank you everybody for joining us today. And as usual, we will be posting this on DCD's YouTube channel, along with the previous dialogues that we've done. They're terrific educational resources, so I encourage you to check out the whole series. Thank you again for being with us.